Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, wherever you are in the world. Today I have Tanya Radu, and did I pronounce your last name correctly, by the way?
It's Rideau.
Radu. There we go. All
It's
right.
okay.
Well, today I have Tanya, and she is the Anti-Sex Trafficking Initiative's team member, brand new to the team. I'm going to allow you to introduce yourself briefly, so go ahead, very briefly.
Hi, I am Tanya Rideau, and I live here in Portland, Oregon. And I've been with World Venture since April of 2023. So that is how brand new I am. So, I came from 17 years of federal service, and I left there in March of this year. And I have 4 children. I've been married for 24 years, and so yeah, it's a little bit about myself.
There we go. Awesome. Let's start with something. Tell us about your testimony a bit.
So my testimony is a little bit what I call a little bit different than most. I grew up in the church. I didn't have a choice. I went to church with my grandmother. And if I was with her, staying the night with her, and it was a Sunday, that's what we did. So, um, you know, I didn't choose Christ. It was chosen for me. And as I got to be an adult and start having children, a couple of my children are making some pretty bad decisions. And so, um, it got to a point, I put them in counseling. I did all these things, and it was like nothing was working. And the only person I could lean on, the only constant, the only was Christ. And I just was like, Lord, I give them to you. And I'm telling you, I used to have panic attacks. I was on medication, like all these things. And it wasn't until I made that decision that I was going to give them to the Lord and allow Him to do whatever His will was going to be, to where I started feeling better, and I didn't have to take those medications anymore, and I wasn't having those panic attacks anymore. So that's a little bit about my testimony.
Awesome, awesome. That God gave you the strength to do what you needed to do.
Yes.
Um, Before we get deeper into your personal and professional background, I want to remind everybody that you are welcome to actually put in comments and questions, and don't feel bad about, if we have already moved on to another subject. You can feel free to ask, and we'll pivot back to it. So you are welcome to put comments. Don't forget to, if you have questions that we cannot answer today, you can private message us your email, and we'll be sure to try to research that answer for you. If you go to Tanya's giving ministry link, you will notice that she has a link tree attached to that, and you will be able to find more resources on anti-sex trafficking and all kinds of resources there, and how to contact her. So, and how to support her, obviously. So let's dig into your background a little bit, so our audience can get to know the newest member. So before coming to World Venture, tell us about in depth about your professional and volunteer background.
Yeah, so like I mentioned previously, I worked for the federal government for 17 years. I loved my job, I loved my team and what I was doing. However, I didn't get that feeling of, what I've learned about myself is I am the type of person that likes to serve. And so, I spent a lot of time, as well as an adult. I was a rape victim advocate for the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office. I did that for a little over 3 years. I was a self-defense instructor for the City of Portland Police Bureau's Girl Strength program, which was a self-defense program for young girls. And so I loved doing that. I loved working with youth. Was a youth leader at my church. So, and I coach. So, there's just a lot of things that I love doing the, um, with the youth, and felt like I was good at it, but I know that it made me feel like I was making a difference. So that is important to me. It's feeling like I'm giving back and making a difference in the world. I've always said that when I leave this earth, I want people to be able to say that I made them feel good. You know what I mean? And so that's really important to me.
Yeah, passing on the legacy is very important. A faith that people can see, who gave you the strength to do all these things.
Yes, absolutely.
Trudy is joining us from Georgia. She says, "I'm so glad that the church is engaging and not turning a blind eye to sex trafficking."
Thanks, Trudy.
So let's talk about what inspired your interest in anti-sex trafficking initiatives. Tell us about that journey.
So, like I mentioned, helping young girls is what is really important to me. And we help them navigate, culture today. And so we address healthy and unhealthy relationship characteristics. We share information on whether someone is showing signs of wanting to harm and or exploit them. And so our curriculum covers both domestic abuse and sex trafficking. And so, and so there's a lot of programs, for this industry. And so, prevention, it could be aftercare, rescue, so our curriculum is based upon prevention. And so for me, showing a young girl what those signs look like before anything ever happens to them, I've heard keeps them from a lifetime of complex trauma, is what I've been told.
Awesome. So, what is that curriculum called that you spoke about?
It is the Girl Strength curriculum. And so I'm the Girl Empowerment Coordinator, and it is, yeah, it's a long word. And so, yes, it is. I'm sorry, not Girl Strength. It's Girl Empowerment Curriculum.
That's okay.
Sorry. And so, yes. And so that curriculum, it covers, there are 7 modules. And then there's an 8th module that includes a parent module. So, if parents want to know what we're going to cover, because it's kind of a scary topic. If you just said domestic abuse and sex trafficking, I think parents wonder, what are you trying to educate, my daughter on? But it's really not like that. And it is written with a biblical framework. And so that's what makes our curriculum so unique. The director of the Anti-Sex Trafficking Initiative team, Adrienne Livingston, who is my supervisor, she co-wrote that curriculum with Michelle Lathrop years ago. And they did an amazing job. And so, like I said, we have been doing some work with a couple of secular groups as well, but it was originally written with a biblical framework. And so that's what I love about it.
Awesome. Awesome. So tell me, how did you become involved with World Venture? Tell me about that journey.
That's a long journey. Yeah. So
That's okay. Tell us all about it.
I met the director, Adrienne, years ago. I think I want to say 2014. Her and I were both going through the Portland Police curriculum training and that was a very in-depth training. It was a long process. It wasn't just a 8-hour thing. There were several hours involved, and that's when I met her, and we completed that training. And then we also taught some classes together. And so we got a chance to work alongside of each other, and, we worked well together. So, fast forward, when she joined World Venture, I ended up taking her facilitator training in 2018, and I loved it. I told her, then, and it was such a big difference between Girl Strength and with the Girl Empowerment curriculum. And so we just kind of stayed in touch. The stranger thing too is she knew my father from high school because my dad went to high school. She knew my brother because my brother is 4 years younger. Her dad and her uncles went to high school with my dad. It is just weird.
Wow.
I found out all this stuff, later on. I was like, what? So yeah. So it was like we knew the same circle of people, but didn't know each other personally until we had did the training together at the city of Portland. So that's kind of how it started. And then, I had talked to her about it, and I knew that this was something. I mean, like I said, because of my work with the sheriff's office, and then with the police bureau. And I knew what this curriculum was about because I had taken her facilitator training. but I also had all those years with, the government, and when it just is different, and
Yeah.
so, but when the job opening came about, I applied, but then I wasn't sure, and I was like, I'm going to pray about this, right? And I prayed and I thought, this is probably not going to work out for whatever reason, but you know, money wise too, especially, it was like, uh, but I prayed about it and God was like, you know what? It's going to be fine. I got you. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like I, and so sure enough, that's exactly how it happened. And I've just been trusting him ever since. And so I know this is where I'm supposed to be.
And that's awesome. I mean, when you take that step into a support role, you're trusting that God will provide all the funding you need, and but it's so worth it because you get a chance to do something meaningful with your life,
Absolutely.
even though it's going to be hard work before you actually get there to full time, but
Yeah.
it is worth it.
Yes.
So let's talk about what do you love about your new role with World Venture?
So I love being a part of an organization of like-minded people that love Christ. Is so different. Being in an organization where you weren't quite sure if you had to whisper and things like that. But also just really what I love teaching girls and equipping them. That's kind of how I look at it is just like a carpenter with a tool belt, right? Giving them all of these tools to empower themselves so that they know what to do if the situation arises. And I kind of compare it to, kids nowadays, they have to do earthquake drills and they have to do, active shooter drills, right? So that if something happens, they know how to act. And that's exactly what I look at this as, is if someone is trying to harm them, they're not afraid to tell someone or use their voice. Setting boundaries, we go over setting boundaries, listening to your intuition, things like that. And so, this isn't we don't just talk about abuse and sex trafficking. We give them everything leading up to that. Like I said, intuition, boundary setting. It's okay to tell someone what your boundaries are, and everyone's boundaries are different. And
Yes.
so, being able to use their voice, that's is so important to me. And so that's what I look at it as, giving them a tool belt, giving them things to put in it, and depending on the situation, drawing from that tool belt and being able to help them.
Awesome. So, just as a reminder to everyone, welcome to everyone who has just joined us. Remember, you can put your comments and your questions in. Don't feel like you're interrupting us. We welcome your interruption. Ask us your questions, and we will do our best to answer it. So let's talk about your involvement in the community. You mentioned being a girl empowerment instructor for the Portland Police Department, rape victim advocate for the county. So, how did you actually get involved in those volunteer aspects? I mean, what was the main thing that made you wake up that morning and say, "Hey, I'm going to be, a rape victim advocate. Hey, I'm going to decide I'm going to be an instructor for the Portland Police Department."
Yeah, the trajectory of my life changed when I was about 14 years old. I had someone very close to me come to me and tell me that they were being abused by a family member. And um, I remember it just shaking me because myself, from a young age, I was always taught these things. I mean, I'm not sure if everyone does that, but my parents, my grandmother, they all talked to me about this subject. And so when that person came to me and told me that they were being abused, I did help them. I tried to get them to help. But, as a teenager, I was about 14 years old when this happened. And, there's not a lot, even though someone's been telling you about this, being able to advocate for another teenager and knowing who to call and what to do, that was hard for me. So, I learned a lot, but I was happy that I was able to help that person. And from that point on, it was very important to me. And so I had my kids fairly early, in my 20s. And so, went to school, was working and it was always at the front of my mind. And so when I had the first opportunity, there were some other places that I tried to volunteer. I was so eager. I turned in my paperwork and never heard back from anybody, but there were some nonprofits and, I know they get busy and things like, but months went by. And so, I was like, do I want to volunteer for an organization that, takes so long to get back to me? As a matter of fact, they just never did. And
Mm.
so when I ran across, I forget who sent it to me. Someone sent me the link for the Rape Victim Advocate. I did that first. And so I was like, man, that sounds like something I would love to do. And so filled out the application. That's also kind of a long process. They go through
Mm.
interviewing and then making sure that you're not still dealing with some trauma yourself
Yeah.
before they get you on. And so, I was able to go through that training. And like I said, I did it a little over 3 years. You get called in the middle of the night, anywhere from after 5 p.m. to about 7 a.m. 911 calls you and you got to report to a hospital. So, that was a lot. And
That's
so,
a big commitment.
yeah, and like I said, it was volunteer. You don't get paid for gas either. But I felt like I was making a difference. Being there with someone that's been through the most horrific experience they've ever been through, and just being there for them, supporting them. Um, it's a good feeling, even though it's a terrible situation. But for you to be that person to help someone is great.
I imagine it would be. So let's talk about anti-sex trafficking. What are people most likely to get? Who are the people most likely to get trafficked, and what signs should we, as regular, walking around town or going to the airport, what signs should we be watching for?
That's a great question. Thank you. So, anywhere, I mean, really, it's anywhere. Most common places are going to be places where kids hang out. So, malls, arcades, parks. It really is anywhere, and especially anywhere where kids are. So, and it's not just happening to just girls, it is happening to girls and boys, and does happen to some women. And so, it's not one of those things where I know a lot of times we watch movies and you think it's just an international problem or it's just a kidnapping problem. It is not. So some of the warning signs could be a child that maybe looks withdrawn. Maybe they don't, maybe you ask them a question and they don't answer, the adult answers. Those aren't just them. But there are several signs. It could be also if, a young kid, maybe they have more than one cell phone. Maybe they've changed the way they dress. They're wearing expensive clothing, shoes, they're getting their nails and hair done all the time, things like that. Those are just a few things. I have added some resources on my link tree from Shared Hope. I got those from Shared Hope International. They're an amazing organization. They're not the only one out there, but they are an organization that I get some resources from. And so I did put a few resources on my link tree if anyone wants to take a look at that has more of the warning signs and like exactly what is child sex trafficking and things like that. So
Yeah, and if you would click on the link that I've shared to the bottom of the post, you will see her link. If you click on it, it will bring her to her ministry profile, and you will see her link tree under resources. And you can just click on that. And there's some really neat PDFs to download to your phone or to view on your computer. So, how do women and girls empower themselves from domestic abuse?
just being aware, if, we have a tool that we use called the love test, and it goes over things like, love is patient, love is kind. However, we put a name in there. And so, is Tanya patient? Is Tanya kind? Going through those. Now, no one's going to be all of those things 100% of the time, but revisiting that every couple of months, because if someone is starting to show signs of anger and aggressiveness and things like that in a way that is unhealthy, and whether or not that person is loving you well, right? So maybe they do love you, but are they loving you well and the way that you deserve to be treated? So, um, you know, empowering them to just being aware and knowing of the signs. And then another really big one is someone trying to isolate you. So, are every time you're wanting to go hang with your friends or with your family, and they're just and it doesn't look like what most people think, like, oh, he just says he doesn't want me to hang out with my family. It might be something strange, like, they don't really get me the way that you do. They don't understand me, but you do. Those kinds. And if that happens on a consistent basis to a point where they're trying to isolate you from the people that love you, that's a problem. And so those are some ways that women and girls can empower themselves, as well as, using their voice. A lot of times, especially, girls that we have worked with, we'll ask them to even say their name. And girls by nature sometimes are so quiet, and we've been taught to be nice, and, girls don't act like that. Well, to some degree, we have to be able to empower our daughters to set boundaries and to say that that's not okay. And I don't like that, or I don't agree with that. Not when mom tells you to, empty the garbage, but, those type of things. So I think that's how we can empower them, is let them know that they have a voice and that they can use it.
Yes, and having a voice is very important, and understanding what scripture says about women. The Lord loves women very much.
Yes.
And so tell me about, how would someone, if they know, in fact, before we get to the next question, Jim and Carrie Benson had a comment. They said, I wish this would have been available years ago. Our daughter was caught up in sex trafficking, a Romeo pimp. She has actually met Adrian here in Portland.
Oh, nice.
So
Yes.
can you explain maybe a Romeo pimp to the rest of the audience if you're able to?
Sure. Yeah. That's kind of what I was saying. It's not necessarily just a situation where, someone just gets kidnapped. It could be a boyfriending situation, is what they call it. And so someone that starts out acting like he's your boyfriend and he loves you and he would do all these things for you, and he's buying you things, and then all of a sudden, if you love me, then you'll do these things for me, and it switches. But it's not usually until they've gotten this other person to fall in love with them and to think that this person truly cares about them. And so, with what Jim and Carrie said, we get that all the time. I mean, quite frankly, I wish I would have had this years ago as well. You know what I mean? So,
Mhm.
but that's why we're trying to get to as many people as we can. And so, this curriculum is an amazing curriculum. And if we can get it to as many girls as we can to prevent this from ever happening, it would be great.
So how would, what are some steps that you would recommend if someone were in your situation when you were younger, where you have someone, a friend or relative who's in a maybe a domestic abuse situation? What are the steps that they should take to help that person?
So what we usually say too, and one of the activities we do with young girls, is we want you to have a list of 5 safe people that you trust. However, only 2 of those people can be family members. 3 need to be non-family members. So it could be your best friend's mom, it could be a counselor, teacher, a coach. Um, all 5 of these people need to be over the age of 18 so that they can help advocate for you. And just really listening. Like I said before, I think we need to have all the answers, and that we need to then ask a bunch of questions. I have people that are trained to do that. So just being supportive, listening, but then getting that person the help if you can. Domestic violence is a very, and sex trafficking is a very kind of tricky and violent subject. So you want to be careful about that and not approaching that other person and or getting that person in any more danger than they already are. So just really, they also have a national domestic violence hotline. And that, I guess, can I give you that phone number and maybe you
Yeah,
can
you
put it?
can. I'll type it in. What is it?
It's the 1-800-799
799
7233.
7233. Okay. It'd be in the chat. This is the domestic, what was it again?
Domestic violence hotline.
Domestic violence hotline. All right. So it should be appearing in the chat very soon. So if you can save that to your phone. So what have you learned about someone rescued from sex trafficking and the process to rehabilitating them back into a productive and healthy society?
Yeah, so what I've learned, most of my work has been in prevention other than being a rape victim advocate. After I would leave them that night, that would be the last, I would do a report and share my information with advocates that would get it the next day. But, that would end my relationship with them. However, what I've learned is that they need support. They just need some support. They need a lot of resources a lot of times, whether that be food, you know, um, shelter, because a lot of times that is how it starts. They say within 48 hours, a runaway youth can be approached by a trafficker. And so, because you're usually looking for food and shelter and things like that. And so just really trying to get that person, the resources that they need, that and just being a supportive person, not judging, things like that. That's really what they need, is just someone to love on them and support them and be there for them. That's really what they need.
So internationally, we have a lot of anti-sex trafficking teams within World Venture who work very hard with Adrienne Livingston to stop this, to via information and empowerment. So internationally, if you know off the top of your head, where in the world is the highest sex trafficking movements? And tell us a bit about maybe some team members and the work they do in those areas.
So most commonly, they are the highest is in Belgium, Italy, Lebanon, Libya, I think the Netherlands, and Nigeria. Those are the most commonly highest trafficked areas. And so, yes, I have a list going. I don't have them all on the top of my head, but I do have a list because I'm trying to connect with them. But yes, we do have a list of global workers that are working in this area and trying to help people internationally as well.
If any of our global workers are out there that are working with us, you may feel free to put your ministry link in the chat.
That would be wonderful.
Yeah, if you want to put that in there, feel free to. You won't be spamming the chat section. You have permission. So Jim and Carrie said, going back to a previous discussion, they need trauma-informed counselors who knows about the kind of PTSD they are experiencing.
Absolutely. Trauma-informed care is so extremely important. Thank you for mentioning that. So yes, because there is a lot of like when I mentioned earlier, that complex trauma, the PTSD, things like that. And so, yes, someone that knows how, and this is all stuff that I'm still learning. And I'm, we did a lot of training when I did the Girl Strength program. But when I started with this position, I've been learning a lot. Adrian's been helping me get a lot of resources on trauma informed care as well. And so, yes, super important.
Awesome. So, what are, speaking of that, we're talking about PTSD and the trauma informed counselors and all that. Um, when a former sex trafficking victim leaves that particular environment, what have you learned or seen, or other people you've heard experience? What do they? What kind of obstacles do they encounter as they unravel what they became while in environment? And how
Yeah.
can believers help a sex trafficking victim?
Yeah. A lot of times, like confidence, self esteem, problems with relationships, trust, things like that. Trust being a huge one. They don't. This usually starts with trying to trust someone, and now someone has exploited them, and they're not the person they thought that loved them really didn't. And so, you know, being able to get the care, the trauma informed care that they need, someone that understands that is huge. And so, as believers, how can we help them? Showing love. A lot of times, I know when I was with my youth at my church, we've done, different kind of care packages. Sometimes they need things, because when you take them out of that environment, they no longer have material things that they need. And so, a lot of times it might be that they need help really with clothes and things like that. But also just someone that can walk alongside of them and love them in a non-judgmental way so that that person can heal.
Walking alongside someone is very, very important, and it's involves your time. It involves, can get a little messy, I imagine.
Yes.
But
Like I said, we don't have to have all the answers either.
no,
If you tell someone, you know what, I don't have the answer, let me try to find out for you. Try not to forget about them. You know what I mean?
exactly.
Try to, at least if you're going to tell them that, try to follow through and point them in the right direction so that they don't feel like yet another person has
Let
let
them
them
down.
down, so to speak. Yeah.
So you are in a support role, and for
Yeah.
those of you not familiar with missions, that means relies on financial support. So tell me about where your support is right now, percentage wise.
Percentage wise, I am only at 10%.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got several trying to set up some appointments, but yes, I'm the Girl Empowerment Coordinator, and I was hired to build capacity. And so, right now we're working in Oregon and Southwest Washington, but Adrian is also trying to roll that curriculum out throughout the United States as well as internationally. And so, she has some work she has to do in order to get to that point. But that is what we're working towards. But my full being at full support is 90,000. And
Okay.
that's not just that's for the program itself. That's to run that program on an annual basis.
So if you would like to support with 20, 50, $10 a month, or whatever's on your heart, all you have to do is go to the link I've put into the chat comments. You can click on that and it will bring you to her giving link, and you can set up an account to where you can set up what you'd like. And then you would be helping with the fight against sex trafficking. So let's go into how people can pray for you in your work.
Oh, yes. Um, Prayer for partnerships. This program, we are trying to partner with 10 organizations. And what that looks like is a 3-year partnership. So we come in, we train your adult leaders. It could be if it's a school, it could be teachers, counselors, anything like that, churches, anything like that. And we're trying to create some partnerships, 3-year partnerships. Please pray for connections. I've been asking for referrals. So if anyone knows of anyone or an organization that maybe this means a lot to them, or maybe they have youth or kids, children, grandchildren, anything. If this, of anyone, just kind of pointing me in their direction would be great. And then individual partners, people that want to partner with me in this fight against domestic abuse and sex trafficking.
Awesome. And so if you would like to write out a prayer in the chat, we will close our time a little later tonight with your prayer. So it doesn't have to be complicated, dear Lord, and just write out something, and we will use that to close our time. And I will remind you, also, if you have questions, you can still ask. We have a few more. We have some more questions to ask here as we go deeper into the subject. But as it is with World Venture in Review, what we always do is we always talk about the topics that were introduced on our social media in the past week. So what we have here is on October 10th, we had Dr. David Whitaker from Venture Church Network. You might have seen today's short version of the live broadcast we did with him. But what I found was interesting is in the broadcast, he talked about how we need to be more like risk takers as a church. We need to make disciples. We need to walk alongside people, as Tanya had said. And so just a question, in order to take those bolder steps as a church, how can the church take a risk and help a sex trafficking or domestic abuse victim? So how do you start a ministry like that? I mean, if they wanted to contact you and have a program, what is the process? What is involved? How many volunteers should they start with?
Yeah. So really taking the bolder step, taking a risk, to me means when someone comes to you and discloses to you something like that, it's our responsibility to hear them, not ignore them, not brush it under the rug as if it's not happening in our church. A lot of times there are things happening in our church. We're not perfect. None of us are. And so, it's just so important, because when we act like it's not happening, that's when you see the hurt happen and things like that. And people, you might see a person that came to church and then all of a sudden you don't see them anymore and things like that. And so taking the risk means, don't just act like it's not happening. If someone is sharing to you, it took a lot for them to share it. And so addressing it, and if you're not sure how to address it, this is a good time to start thinking about it. And yes, anyone can reach out to me, and I'll work with Adrienne. Like I said, this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to partner with churches, and we're trying to get this out there because we know that it is happening, and we want to make sure that the youth in their church is protected. And so by sharing this information, and the prevention part of it is huge. And so, there's a lot of programs out there, but, this being that we have the biblical framework within makes it so unique. And, that's the part that I love, but it's our goal. That's what we want to do. We want to work with churches and to get to roll this information out. So ideally, anywhere from 4 to 6, we say as a minimum. We've worked with as much as 16. So I'd say 4 to 16. And so, because we do a lot of activities, we do role playing, we do activities. And right now it's just Adrienne and I. And so that makes kind of a, perfect class, so to speak, and allows, people to share and for us to do a lot of these activities with everyone in the class.
Perfect. Yeah. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Remember to write out a prayer so we can use your prayer to close out our time today. But another thing is the Liebermans, basically they serve in Japan. They were talking about the Shinto religion, and we had posted about it this past week, how it's so interwoven um, into their community and family. And it just brought to mind, when you've got victims of domestic abuse or victims of sex trafficking, um, it brought to mind to a question. Do people from sex trafficking and domestic abuse backgrounds struggle with identity or purpose after getting out? And can you tell me how, or
Do
what
they
you learned?
struggle with identity? I don't know if I would. I'm not exactly sure on that answer as far as identity. Yes, on purpose after getting out, depending on how long this person has been doing this. Um, that could be all they know, and sometimes they start at a very young age. And so, and depending on the brainwashing and things that have happened to them, their self-esteem and things like that, or what if they've been told they can or can't do, might be affected by that. So I can't really answer your question on identity, but definitely purpose. Um, and there's just just really so much of, which is why the comment that was brought up on trauma informed care, because there's just so much that's involved with it after they get out.
Another part of that question would be, what have you learned that it takes to build up faith in a person from sex trafficking or an abusive background, especially if this person from a domestic abuse situation is coming from a religious background? Because how at least I've read about situations where, verses are twisted around, and suddenly, in abusive situations, the father is, the father figure is likened to God the Father. And so,
Yeah.
what have you learned how it takes to rebuild that faith back into the real God?
I've actually talked to people from both sides of the examples that you just given me. Some that don't believe that there is a God, but I know that I know some personally that do still believe in him. And so, what does it take to build up? I think kind of the example that I gave earlier of, you know, when someone discloses to me, it's a cry for help. They just want someone to believe them. And so when it's ignored or brushed under the rug like it's not happening, that can hurt a person. And so, I just think the resources and the reaction that they get from the person that they're telling is important. And then, like I said, too, not always, we don't have to. I'm not going to go into a huge detail, but especially when it comes to kids, they say not to ask a lot of leading questions.
Mm.
If a kid tells you something, it's then your job to report it. So for me, I'm a mandatory reporter, so I have to, but, just report it. And if the person that's trained to do this finds out that, maybe that wasn't what it was or whatever, then that's on them. But when you start asking too many questions, it can kind of muddy the water, so to speak, and we don't want to do that. But especially in women, someone's coming to you and they're really asking for some help, and they're just hoping someone, will help them. And so I'd like to reiterate too, just being careful if someone is in a situation, be it domestic abuse and or sex trafficking. It can be violent. And so I just would hate to see anyone, get hurt or anything, making sure that they handle that the right way so that, getting the right people involved instead of trying to intervene personally.
Awesome answer. So if you have any questions, now's your last chance. If you have any last minute questions, we have two prayers that we will read towards the end. Jim and Carrie Benson and Trudy Cannonberg, thank you very much. We will use your prayers. But if you have any questions, now's your chance before we close for the evening. Any questions, any comments? If not, okay, I'm going to start with Jim and Carrie Benson's prayer, and we'll go ahead and pray for that one, and then we'll move on to Trudy's.
Okay.
So, dear Lord, thank you for expanding this ministry through World Venture. We ask that you would raise up those who would support it financially and prayerfully. Please lay this ministry in the hearts of those who would answer the call to support survivors of sex trafficking and domestic abuse by providing housing, emotional support, and however you'd call them to help those impacted. We pray that this curriculum would be planted in the hearts of youth and empower them to recognize unhealthy relationships and see it in their friends and be bold to reach out to adults who can help. Trudy, we start with Trudy's prayer. Father, thank you that no one is unimportant or insignificant to you. Thank you that domestic abuse and anti-sex trafficking are important issues for the church to acknowledge. Thank you for Tanya and her heart for these girls. I pray you help build partnerships and bring alongside those who will be partners in support. In Jesus' name we praise. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you for all the questions and the comments, the prayers. I really, really do appreciate it.
Now, I would encourage all of you, go to her link tree. It's under linked words on her profile. And you can click on it and it'll have all the information you need, including some handouts. And feel free to connect with her. If you kind of forget how to connect with her, you can always private message us at World Venture, and I'll make sure that she gets all the contact info forwarded on to her. If you're watching this after the fact when it's no longer live, I will forward on all your questions and comments to her. And she can address you directly. So thank you everyone for joining us. If there are no other questions, we will close for the evening. Just as a reminder, November 1st is our next live stream. We're featuring Joshua Project and World Venture coming together, Gordon and Keith, to pray for an unreached people group in the Bhutan. If I'm pronouncing that one correctly, since I can't seem to pronounce things correctly today at all. So anyway, hope you join us November 1st. And be watching. We've got a lot of live streams coming up in November that we're putting together currently. So we hope you join us there. And remember, it's a 3-way conversation. We want to see your comments. We don't view them as an interruption. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Stay on, Tanya.